Welcome back to the 98th online episode of Peacetime, hosted every Sunday morning by Peace Point with myself, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, coming to you today from DIMC in Azusa, California. In the previous session, we looked at the second of two sessions on Buddhist economics, and today we continue on our journey through an anthology of important suttas from Buddhist scriptures by looking at a discourse called the Dhammacakkapavattana Sutta. And I estimate today's session will run to about an hour and 10 minutes with a 30-minute break halfway through for some meditation. So as usual with our chosen sutta, we will work our way through the sequence of sources, sutta name meaning, interlocutors, place names, and overview before looking at the main body of the manuscript itself, the outcome of the sutta, and finishing up with some of the issues the sutta raises. I should add that this sutta is often chanted and memorized in Pali in our temple tradition. And I'll give you a little example here.
Ewa me sutang Ekang samayang bhagawa paranasiyang viharati isipatane mikataye tatrako bhagawa panjavakiye bhikkhu amante sithawe me bhikkhave anta.
In case you can recognize the Pali chanting. So we have more than the usual degree of familiarity with the content of the original language, if perhaps not so much with its meaning. So hopefully we can redress something of this situation today. So the Dhammacakkapavattana Sutta we'll be studying in today's session comes from the fifth volume of the Samyutta Nikaya, specifically the Satya Samyutta of the Mahāvākka. It is therefore referenced in Western scholarship as S5 420 or SN 56.11. Today, the translation manuscript I'll make use of is Bhikkhu Bodhi's The Year 2000 Wisdom Publications edition version of the Connected Discourses of the Buddha. For commentary today, I'll be able to draw heavily on the Venerable Tetshuo's book, The Buddha's First Teaching, which I translated to English back in 2002. The Venerable Tetshuo's book is based largely on an 800-year-old commentary on the sutta called the Sarata Samuccaya. So, the name of the sutta we are studying today is the Dhammacakkapavattana Sutta, which literally means the discourse on the setting in motion of the wheel of the Dharma. The Dharma wheel, especially with 8 spokes representing the Eightfold Path, is considered to be a universal symbol of Buddhism and has the dubious honor of even recently becoming a standard emoji. The teaching of the Buddha is compared to a royal chariot of Dharma, which the Buddha would use to transport the beings of the world out of the cycle of existence, or vata samsara, to the eternal safety of nirvana, with the Buddha himself at the reins. One indispensable component of such a chariot would of course be its wheels, or jaka. So, as the chariot was a Dhamma chariot, then the wheels would be Dhamma wheels, or Dhammacakka, which is the name of this sutta. Any wheel has 3 important components: the hub, the spokes, and the rim. The Dhammacakka was also composed of these 3 components, and the Buddha compared the hub to the 37 factors of enlightenment known in Pali as the Bodhipakkhiya. The spokes were compared to the 12 links of dependent origination known in Pali as Paticca Samuppada, and the rim was compared to the 4 Noble Truths. For as long as the components are separate, they could not be called a wheel. It's just like a skilled wheelwright. The Buddha has assembled the components to make a strong wheel ready to roll. The Pavattana suffix to the name refers to the setting in motion of the wheel, in reference to the precedent that by this sutta that it was the first teaching that the Buddha gave to the public. The Buddha, by giving this sermon, produced a Dhammacakka and set it turning towards ultimate liberation. So turning now to interlocutors, there are 6 people directly involved in the sutta: the Buddha, who in this translation is called by his epithet, the Blessed One, and his audience of 5 ascetics known collectively as the Group of 5 or the Panchavakkiya. In fact, this group consists of his 5 former friends, namely Kondañña, Patiya, Wapa, Mahanama, and Asaji. Later, after his attainment of stream entry, Kondañña becomes known as Anya Kondañña, literally Kondañña who knows. In fact, this group of 5 were seasoned meditators who had practiced renunciation and self-mortification alongside the Buddha himself for 6 years, so the teaching is aimed at an advanced audience. Some people assume that because the Dhammacakkapavattana Sutta is the Buddha's first teaching, it ought to be a simple one, but this is not the case, because it starts at the level of understanding of high-level meditators who are the Buddha's audience. In terms of location, the teaching was given at Isipatana Deer Park, close by the town of Benares, or Varanasi, which was within walking distance of the place in northeast India at Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha had become enlightened. In the present day, this place is known as Sarnath Deer Park. Asian people pronounce it Saranath. In the present day, it is known as Sarnath Deer Park and is located 6 miles northeast of Benares. It was nominated by UNESCO as a Site of Outstanding Universal Value to Cultural Heritage in 1998, especially the Dhammic Stupa, which you can see in the slide, and the Asokan Pillar. It is one among the 4 holy sites of Buddhism mentioned by the Buddha in the Parinibbana Sutta as a place where, if Buddhists were to make a pilgrimage with faith in their hearts, they would go to heaven after passing away. So the sutta starts by instructing how to avoid the 2 extremes of practice and identifies the middle way between the 2 extremes as the Eightfold Path. The Buddha then outlines in summary the 4 noble truths of the noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of the origin of suffering, the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, and the noble truth of the path to the cessation of suffering. The Buddha then explains how each of these 4 noble truths should be contemplated in 3 phases to give a total of 12 aspects. The sutta finishes by setting down the outcomes of the teaching for the immediate audience and for those in the celestial realms. So something of the backstory after the enlightenment which transformed Siddhartha Gautama into the Buddha. Beneath the Bodhi tree on the banks of the river Naranjara, in Bodh Gaya on the full moon night of the 6th lunar month of Visakha, the Buddha sat further to absorb the bliss of his enlightenment and further to consider the Dhamma which he had learned for a period of another 7 days before finishing his meditation. The Buddha then spent a further 6 weeks under various trees reflecting on how to share the enlightenment experience with others. Eventually the Buddha decided that the group of 5, or Panchabhakya, were the most likely to understand his teaching, and traveled to Sarnath to teach them there. Initially, the group of 5 had planned to snub the Buddha for abandoning them and their self-mortification practice in favor of moderate eating and internalized meditation. But when they saw him face to face, they forgot their pact and listened to him because he claimed to have reached enlightenment, something that they had never before heard him claim. Traditionally, the Dhammacakkapavattana Sutta was given on a Salha Puja day, which is the full moon day of the 8th lunar month, falling in around July, an anniversary which is still celebrated by Buddhists around the world to this day. So continuing in the manuscript to paragraph 2, we can see the Buddha addressed the group of 5 with the words, "O bhikkhus, monks who wish to overcome suffering, must strictly avoid the 2 extremes of practice, namely the pursuit of sensual indulgence and the pursuit of self-mortification." The Buddha stipulates these 2 paths of practice are unprofitable and might even be harmful. The Buddha is able to explain the dangers of these extreme paths because he himself had experimented with both paths of practice, namely the years spent in the royal palace, which were pure pursuit of sensual indulgence, and 6 years after renouncing the palace, spent in the practice of self-mortification. Finally, he rejected these 2 extremes, and his time spent underneath the Bodhi tree, he followed a 3rd way, which he called the middle way between these 2 extremes. Finding a way between the extremes is often compared to tuning the strings of a musical instrument, which must be neither too tight nor neither too loose in order to produce a melodic sound. So, to go into a little more detail, the path of sensual pleasure, or as it's known in Pali, Kama Sukhalikkhanu Yoga, is to seek for pleasures through the channels of the 5 outer senses: eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and physical contact. I guess what you would refer to as gluttony in other religions. Such pleasures reduce the seeker to worldly mundaneness. The more a person lets their mind be influenced by the sense pleasures, the more defilements they will accrue in their mind. Therefore, the Buddha taught that the path of sense pleasure is sordid, impure, without benefit, ignoble, and inappropriate for monks, because it offers no path to release from defilements. Reliance on such sense pleasures becomes so ingrained that a person gives no more thought to renunciation or going forth into the monkhood. Since I've already given a lot of metaphors for the dangers of sensuality in blessing number 32, today I will only mention them in passing. Suffice it to say that sensuality never satiates our appetite, gives diminishing returns with age, and burns us if we get too close. Also, objects of sensuality can never truly be owned, come with conditions and responsibilities, and lead to clinginess and suspicion. The opposite extreme to sensual indulgence is self-mortification, known in Pali as Atthakila Matanu Yoga. But according to the Buddha, the spiritual practice of self-mortification is also fruitless and is definitely harmful. In the present day, it might be called self-harm, but in the time of the Buddha, it was elevated to a spiritual practice by those who believed that subduing the body with pain would release the spirit. He said that it is not a practice in keeping with the tenets of Buddhism because the way in which defilements are purportedly removed are by penances of physical self-denial, such as lying on a bed of nails, burning oneself in the sun, burning oneself in front of a fire, beating one's shins with a piece of wood, walking around under the weight of a burden of sand, or extreme fasting. Some ate a diet restricted to fruit or pickled vegetables, or the tips of rice grains, or nothing but rice or rice husks. Lying on a bed of nails produces such pain that all thoughts of sensual pleasure disappear temporarily. Such practitioners understand that they have rid themselves of their defilements, but in fact the defilements are still there because the sensuality returns again as soon as the pain stops. This is the practice of self-denial or self-mortification, which is a non-Buddhist practice. It's one of the many practices favored by non-Buddhist ascetics such as the Niganthas. The group of 5 had already practiced self-mortification for 6 years, living only on 1 mouthful of food per day, leaving their hair to grow long, wearing only animal skins, never washing. All these non-Buddhist practices only increase one's suffering and cannot be considered a path to the end of suffering. Commentorial metaphors for the harm of self-mortification compare it to sweetened poison, stale excrement mistaken for medicine, jumping into a fire, or a grasshopper jumping into a fire. A vengeful ogre which follows one everywhere with a vow to kill one at the first opportunity, a poisonous snake mistaken for a rope, jumping over a cliff, or trusting an enemy. It is for all these reasons that the Buddha taught that self-mortification is to be avoided, because it's unwholesome, ignoble, and unsuitable for monks subscribing to Buddhism to practice or to associate with. Turning to paragraph 3, what the Buddha advocates in place of the extremes of sensual indulgence or self-mortification was the middle way, known in Pali as the Majjhima Patipata. It is the path of practice that is conducive to taming the mind, supreme knowledge, virtuous knowledge, the extinguishing of craving, and for liberation from defilements. It is the practice of the noble ones. The Buddha advocated practice of the middle way according to the Noble Eightfold Path, known in Pali as Ariyo Atangiko Makho, namely right view, Samma Ditti, right intention, Samma Sankappa, right speech, Samma Vaja, right action, Samma Gammanta, right livelihood, Samma Ajiva, right effort, Samma Vayama, right mindfulness, Samma Sati, and right concentration, Samma Samadhi. Anyone who wishes to escape from the cycle of rebirth, who has gone to all the trouble to renounce the life of a householder, should devote themselves to the practice of the middle way, which consists of 8 path factors because it is a condition of attaining nirvana. As shown in the slide, the Eightfold Path is cyclical in nature, effectively a spiral like a vinyl record that zeroes in on the still or enlightened mind at the center, from the basic level of the outside to the transcendental level of the inside. And as I mentioned in Blessing 33, at the basic level, right view would mean confidence in the logic of karma and the refuge of the Triple Gem, as well as overcoming 10 sorts of false view. Right intention would mean intending to break free from the influence of sense desire, vengefulness, and aggression by being generous, keeping 5 precepts, and meditating. Right speech would mean avoiding lies, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle chatter. Right action would mean refraining from killing or cruelty towards living beings, stealing, and sexual relations outside marriage, as well as generally doing things by the rules. Right livelihood would mean refraining from earning one's living by selling weapons, slaves, animals to the slaughterhouse, alcohol, drugs, poison, or other forms of exploitation, fixing weights and measures for use in business or otherwise misleading customers. Right effort would mean not succumbing to unwholesome habits which you never did before, overcoming any unwholesome habits which you already possess, developing good habits you never had before, and maintaining the good habits you already have. Right mindfulness would mean keeping our mind on wholesome thoughts without distraction, especially by practicing meditation until attaining one-pointedness of mind. Right concentration would mean entering upon the mental absorptions. At the higher levels, a right view would mean a fiercely accurate understanding of life in the world, untainted by defilements, based on thorough understanding of the Four Noble Truths, namely insight into the clinging of the 5 aggregates. Right intention would mean release from the 3 types of wrong preoccupation, or akusala vitaka, and bias or agate. Right speech would mean unless what one says is skillful speech, one would prefer to maintain noble silence. Right action would mean practice for the removal of every last trace of ignorance and craving. Right livelihood would mean earning one's living in a compassionate way. Right effort would mean dedicating ourselves actively to the attainment of nirvana. Right mindfulness would mean cultivating the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Right concentration would mean seeing and knowing the 4 Noble Truths and the 3 universal characteristics of the 5 aggregates until casting off the defilements, attaining cessation of suffering, and entering upon nirvana. Commentarial metaphors for the benefits of the middle way include the righteous emperor, because the Noble Eightfold Path is a supreme and noble practice, a wide ocean into which all the rivers must flow, a palace spire, a jewel on top of all the other virtuous teachings of the Buddha, a wish-fulfilling jewel of 8 facets, and a chariot of the Dharma which transports the practitioner to nirvana. So, moving on to paragraph 4, we come to the Buddha's explanation of the 4 Noble Truths, which are the context for practice of the middle way, showing how it is the medicine that cures the disease of suffering. So the Buddha continues with the noble truth of the origin of suffering before continuing with the noble truth of cessation of suffering and the noble eightfold path. The noble truth of suffering, or in Pali, dukkha ariya satya, is justified by his explanation that the physical body is the crossroads for suffering and a storehouse of unwholesomeness. So suffering is in the form of the inevitable and mitigable forms, the details of which you can see on the slide, but for which you would need to revisit Blessing 33 if you want further elaboration. With paragraph 5, we come to the noble truth of the origin of suffering, or in Pali, dukkha samudaya ariya satya. Here the Buddha points to 3 types of craving: craving for sense pleasures, craving to be something, and craving not to be something. Actually, the translation is slightly misleading because in effect, they refer to craving for each of the 3 planes of existence: the plane of the senses, the plane of the form realms, and the plane of the formless realms, all of which must be relinquished in order to reach nirvana, or cessation of suffering. So coming to paragraph 6, we see the Buddha explains the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, or in Pali, dukkha nirodha ariya satya. as it is the remainderless fading away and cessation of all forms of craving, the giving up and relinquishing of it, freedom from it, non-reliance on it. Moving on to paragraph 7, the Buddha explains the noble truth of the path to the cessation of suffering, or in Pali, Dukkha Nirodha Gamini Arya Satya, which is of course the middle way or the Noble Eightfold Path, which is a repeat of the 8 path factors that we have already mentioned. At the end of this paragraph, we can see the refrain of things arising in the Buddha's mind to accompany this new knowledge, that shows that this was not just intellectual understanding, but was accompanied by several other experiences within the mind: vision, knowing, wisdom, true knowledge, and light. So before we continue with the remainder of the sutta, perhaps it's a good juncture to avail ourselves of some vision, knowing, wisdom, true knowledge, and inner light for ourselves by taking a break halfway and settling ourselves for 30 minutes of meditation, which today is a live track recorded back in March 2022, entitled Pathway to the Utmost Purity of Mind. If at this time you would like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself as you listen to my guidance. So I'd like to invite everyone to close their eyes very gently. Relax all the muscles of your body and make sure your breathing and your circulation are relaxed and unimpeded. If any part of your body is not completely relaxed, then adjust your body to minimize any possible aches or pains. Try to find a position for yourself by which you feel alert and yet relaxed. And although our meditation is mostly about relaxing the mind, we need to spend a few moments to relax our body first of all. Because if our body is not completely relaxed, then it's going to be difficult for our mind to relax afterwards. So we start by relaxing the muscles of our forehead, our eyebrows and our eyelids, making sure our eyes are only very gently closed. We never squeeze our eyes closed, but close our eyes gently, in much the same way we would go to sleep. From there we relax the muscles of our face, our neck. We can relax both shoulders, both arms, down to the tips of our fingers. Continuing on down, we relax the muscles of our chest, trunk, and our abdomen, both of our legs, right the way down to the tips of our toes, so that all the way from the top of our head, right the way down to the tips of our toes, is completely free of any stress or tension. But if we notice any tension still remaining in our body, then we do our best to relax it as far as possible, until we're left with the feeling as if our body seems to have melted away into the atmosphere around us, almost as if we had forgotten completely about our body. So that we can turn our attention inwards instead, taking a few moments to make sure our state of mind is relaxed. The easiest way to relax the mind is just to forget for a few moments about all the worries, all the things lingering on our mind from our everyday life. Whether it be thoughts of work, friends, family, school, thoughts of the future or of the past. We put all of these thoughts on one side just for a moment, rather like clearing up all the documents on our office desk, putting them away in a drawer before locking it with a key. In the same way, we empty our mind completely of any thoughts, and instead we make our mind light, radiant, spacious, and refreshed. We fill our mind instead with a sense of happiness and joy, as if tiny particles of happiness and joy completely filled the mind, leaving no space in the mind for any other sort of thought. When we feel relaxed and refreshed, both in body and in mind, very gently, using no effort at all, we imagine that inside our body is just an empty space, with no organs or tissues, no muscles or bones. Just a hollow space inside ourselves. Or if you like, you can imagine that your whole body has been transformed to be like a bubble, with the thinnest of transparent skin and hollow on the inside. Again, with no organs or tissues, no muscles or bones. Now very gently and very slowly, at a point in the middle of our body, we remember back to that picture of the bright, shining sun, which we saw a few moments ago. Maybe yellow or white in color, red or gold, doesn't really matter. And if you can't think of the sun, then think of any other round, bright object which you find easiest to imagine. The important thing is to imagine that object as continuously as you can, for as long as you can, with a very gentle attention. Sometimes we overlook the importance of the word gentle, but often there's a temptation to use too much force when we come to meditate. So we need to be constantly reminded of how gentle we need to be. Some people do the mental equivalent of staring within themselves, which requires using force in their meditation, thinking it's going to help them get better results. But in fact, it only prevents the meditation from progressing. Instead, we need to be as gentle as possible, very light in the way we place our attention at the center of the body. If we find our mind wanders anywhere else, as soon as we realize, we just bring our mind back again to the center of the body as before. If your bright object disappears, you can always think of a new one. But if the object changes in size, shape, color or form, we simply continue to observe at its center, always observing at the brightest spot in the center of the object. And before long we'll start to find that the object will evolve and transform of its own accord, changing to become an object which is more perfect inside us, such as a bright crystal sphere, like a crystal ball, inside ourselves. In the beginning, for those who are not used to meditation, the mind will be of a nature to wander rather a lot. The sounds around us, the sensations in our body or thoughts in our head may distract us. But our job as a meditator, if our mind should wander, is simply to bring our mind back again to the center each and every time, however many times it takes for our mind to settle at the center. In the beginning, the object which we can observe in our center will not be very distinct. It may seem rather lifeless and may be as if it's flat and dull. For others it may be as if we can see only a part of the object. But later, as the mind becomes more settled in the center, the object will become more lifelike. We'll be able to see the whole of the object, as if we were seeing it in 3 dimensions. And the feeling that accompanies observing that object will be different from before. There'll be a sense of joy that arises whenever we're able to see the object. A feeling of joy that will help us to keep the mind on the object the whole of the time. Because if our mind wanders away, then the sense of joy will disappear. We keep our mind always at the center of whatever we see, and what we find is that the object will become gradually clearer, softer, and it may become an object that's not the same as the one which we started out with, because it will be an object which arises spontaneously. Whatever form it takes, we continue to observe at its center, and the object will continue in its journey of transformation to an object which is of a form that we can expand or contract at will. And eventually it will become an object which is so clear and so bright that we know it's something different to what we have experienced before. Often bright, sparkling like a diamond, brighter even than the midday sun, giving a sense of expansion in the mind, whereby we can see that this point at the center is no longer merely just a point anymore, but is the beginning of a pathway like a bright tunnel, which seems to lead ever downwards inside us. And this may or may not have a stream of crystal spheres inside it. But whatever our inner experience, our job is merely to rest our mind in stillness at the center. As soon as our mind is sufficiently subtle, the mind will go deeper inside, deeper to draw upon all the knowledge, or the intuition that is hidden beneath the surface of the mind, along an axis which will eventually lead us all the way to the utmost purity and clarity of the mind as we go. So now, for a few more moments in silence, we cultivate the mind in stillness at the center, with or without a bright object, or simply observing what is already there to be seen. Each to their own practice in silence now for a few more moments, until we come to the appropriate time. Don't forget, if your mind wanders off onto other things, no matter whether it be the sounds around you, sensations in your body, or thoughts in your head, as soon as you realize, simply bring your attention back again to the center of your body as before. Always keep your mind at the center of whatever the inner experience is inside. If it wanders away, we can bring it back. If that inner experience disappears, we can conjure up a new one. But if it changes, we just follow it in its new form. And our practice becomes one of observation of the gradual changes in our inner experience. Continue to remain at the center of that, lightly, gently, continuously, each to our own practice for a few more moments in silence before we come to time for our loving kindness meditation for today. We continue to keep our mind on track at the center of the body the whole of the time, always at a standstill, at the center of whatever inner experience we have built up for ourselves in our meditation so far. For some people, the inner experience arising from the meditation will be rather like a sense of inner brightness, or perhaps like a pinpoint of light at the center of the body. For others, it may be more like a feeling of warmth or well-being at the center of the body, or perhaps inner images, large or small, centered around the middle of ourselves. But whatever sort of inner experience we've built up for ourselves, we touch very gently with our attention at the center of that experience, the center of the inner experience within ourselves, touching gently with the same lightness of a feather floating down to touch upon the surface of some water, touching so lightly that the feather doesn't even break the surface of the water. The same way we touch with our attention at the center of the inner experience within ourselves. We touch that inner experience with just the right amount of effort. What we'll find is that the inner experience of the mind will gradually expand outwards from the point of contact, expanding outwards until it's the same size as the whole of our own body, as if we are sitting inside a sphere of our own well-being or a sphere of our own light. And at this point we can make the affirmation to ourselves that may we ourselves be well and happy, may we be free from all suffering. And touching our mind again at the center of the body, the sphere of well-being or the sphere of light will spread gradually outwards beyond the boundaries of our own body, spreading outward in all directions, just as the moonlight shines forth from the full moon in the night sky, or just as a block of ice sends forth the coolness in all directions around itself into the atmosphere. In the same way, we spread our loving kindness outwards in all directions, spreading that sphere of loving kindness outwards to encapsulate the whole of the room in which we are sitting for meditation, while making the wish that may all living beings here in this room be well and happy, free from all suffering. We spread our loving kindness further outwards still, outwards from the center of our body to encapsulate the whole of the building in which we are sitting for meditation. Again with the wish that may all living beings here in the building be well and happy, be free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. We spread our loving kindness further outwards still, beyond the building, outwards in all directions around us into the neighborhood around us, again with the wish that may all living beings here in the neighborhood be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. Spreading loving kindness further outwards still to the whole of this city. And if we find it easier to imagine the city as a map across which we spread our loving kindness, and we can imagine the city in that way, spreading our loving kindness across the whole of the map of the city, in all directions all around. So there's no part of this city not touched by the coolness, radiance of our loving kindness. Again, making the wish that may every living being here in the city be well and happy, free from all suffering, live together in peace and harmony. We spread loving kindness further outwards still beyond the city limits, to the whole of the county, or the country. Spreading loving kindness outwards to the very borders of the country in all directions. Again, with the wish that may all living beings here in this country be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. We can spread loving kindness to the neighboring countries, the whole continent, with the wish that may every living being here on this continent be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. Spreading our loving kindness further still to every continent of the world, with that same coolness and radiance. The wish that may all living beings on every continent be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. Until our loving kindness spreads across the entire face of this planet, with the wish that every being, whether on the land, in the air or in the sea, be touched by our loving kindness, live together in peace and harmony, that true peace might prevail in our world. We can spread our loving kindness outwards in all directions, into the universe, to the front and the back, to the right and to the left, above and below, emanating loving kindness outwards into the universe around us, with the wish that wherever in the universe there may be living beings, that they too be touched by this coolness and radiance of our loving kindness, in such a way that we can spread our loving kindness without limits, without exceptions. And having spread loving kindness in this way, we condense our awareness back down to the center of our body again, taking careful note of the brightness, the clarity, the feeling of peace and joy at the center of our body. In particular, taking note of the sense of well-being at our center, remembering this feeling as well as we can, because this feeling of well-being is very important for us. It represents a state of progress in meditation that we have reached up until now. So if we can remember this feeling as well as we can, the next time we sit down to meditate again, we can pick up from where we left off with this feeling and continue to make uninterrupted progress in our next session. But for now, we continue to meditate for the last few moments of this practice, taking a few moments to note the state of progress in our meditation, remembering the feeling as well as we can for a few more moments in silence. Sabba Buddhanupavena, Sabba Dhammanupavena, Sabba Sankhanupavena Sattha Soti Bhavantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, and you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gradually finishing your practice. So returning gently to our subject matter for today on the Dhammacakkapavattana Sutta, we pick up again with the 3 cycles and the 12 components in the latter half of the teaching. As we see in paragraph 8, the insight gained by the Buddha into the Four Noble Truths was gained in 3 successive cycles of examination that brings to the practitioner 3 successive forms of knowledge that, for the Noble Truth under examination, this is the truth, this truth is fully to be understood, and this truth has been fully understood. Before this point, it is true we had already identified the Four Noble Truths, but our knowledge thus far had been only theoretical, like a to-do list. In fact, for the Arya Satya to work, to attain stream entry like Kondañña, they need to be seen by the practitioner, and not just once, but according to Dhammacakkapavattana Sutta, 12 times. 3 cycles in 12 characteristics, each time eliciting the 5 co-arising factors with the knowledge. Seeing the Noble Truths is different from seeing other things because the seer is transformed for the better by the act of seeing them. The sight of craving will immediately cause us to relinquish that craving, and having relinquished it, we will recognize the completion of the task. This is equivalent to recognizing this is the medicine while automatically realizing this medicine should be taken and eventually recognizing this medicine has now been taken successfully. So to make some sense of this, perhaps in terms of the system of inner bodies or with the great habit of Vapaknam, this task at this level is for the body of enlightenment of the meditator to use the Buddha eye to see the Noble Truths in each one of their inner bodies. For each body there are 3 stages or cycles of examination where Satchayana means seeing the existence of the Noble Truth in that body, where Kichayana means seeing what needs to be done in relation to that Noble Truth in that body, and the Katayana means recognizing the completion of the task in relation to the Noble Truth in that body. As there are 4 Noble Truths multiplied together, according to the Dhammacakkapavattana Sutta, we get 12 characteristics. But remember, in that teaching, Kondañña only reached the level of stream enterer. In order to use the Noble Truths to eradicate all defilements from the mind, to reach the same level as the Buddha or the Arahants, although it is the same sequential method, the work needs to be continued, making use of all the Dhamma bodies, eradicating the final 10 subtle defilements or fetters, known in Pali as samyojana, from the mind, and for the details of this you need to look back at Blessing 33. So, turning now to the outcome of the teaching, after the Buddha had clarified the harmfulness of the extremes of sensual indulgence and self-mortification, and advocated following the middle way or the Noble Eightfold Path, the group of 5, especially Kondañña, who was most seasoned in his perfections, was able to become a stream enterer, the first to attain enlightenment under the dispensation of the current Buddha. As we see in paragraph 12, Kondañña, the leader of the group of 5, attained stream entry or sotapanna. He had seen with the eye of the body of enlightenment that whatever is of the nature of arising has the nature of cessation. And in his context, he saw that his own aggregates were of such a nature, all of the nature of arising and cessation. In paragraph 13, we see that since the wheel of the Dharma had now been set in motion by the Buddha, the various levels of celestial beings in ever higher celestial realms rejoiced in the teaching. The earth sprites, or Bhumadevata, exclaimed that the teaching was incomparable with anything previously taught by monks, Brahmins, angels, Maras, gods, or anyone in the world. The praises resounded amongst the angels sequentially higher and higher in the various levels of heaven until it reached the Brahma world. The cosmos quaked, and there arose limitless brightness. The Buddha knew of the attainment of Kondañña and exclaimed in paragraph 15 that Anyasi Watapo Kondañño, Anyasi Watapo Kondañño, Kondañña now you know, and for this reason Kondañña was henceforth known as Anya Kondañña, Kondañña who knows. What is not set out in the sutta, but which is the epilogue to our sutta, Apart from announcing the value of Buddha Dhamma to the world, it won over the group of 5 monks who had previously been skeptical to want to join the Buddhist tradition and practice strictly henceforth according to the Buddha's teaching. Just as an aside, the reason Kondañña reached stream entry before his contemporaries was because of a wish he made as Mahakala. So, just to take a quick detour to tell the story, according to the Dhammacakkapavattana commentary a long time ago, in the time of the Buddha Vipassi, there was a householder called Mahakala. Being a generous guy, he hired a large number of men for manual labor and ordered grains of unripe rice to be hulled, had it cooked in rich milk, adding ghee, honey, and sugar, and presented the rice thus prepared to the monastic community presided over by the Buddha. At the conclusion of the meal, the man made the wish, "By virtue of this my gift of first fruits, may I be the first to win the foremost estate of all, namely arahantship." When he went back to his field and looked at it again, he found that the entire field was filled with heads of growing rice, bound together, as it were, in sheaves. At this sight he experienced the 5 kinds of joy. He realized, "I am indeed fortunate," and from that time onwards he offered timely gifts of the first fruits to the Sangha in a similar way at 9 different stages of his harvest. When the rice was in the ear, when the rice was reaped, when it was in the sheaf, when it was in the stack, when it was in the rick, when it was threshed, when it was ground into flour, when it was measured, and when it was put away in the storehouse. In this way he bestowed the first fruits of a single crop 9 times. No matter how much he removed to present as gifts to the monastic community, he was always left with a plentiful harvest. Because he was always the first to give, 91 world cycles later he was fulfilled in his wish to become the first to attain enlightenment under the dispensation of the Buddha Gautama in our own era under the name of Kondañña, who was to attain sainthood before his other 4 colleagues. The other 4 members of the Panchavakkhiya were all inspired to faith in the Buddha as a result of the Dhammacakkapavattana Sutta and became dedicated to practice further in earnest according to the Buddha's teaching. Indeed, we find in the scripture of the Anathalakkana Sutta that the remainder of the Panchavakkhiya, together with Kondañña, were to attain arahantship and become the first disciples of the Buddha to attain full enlightenment. So as far as I can discern, there are 4 issues arising from the study of this sutta: Siddhartha's special ability to be awakened to suffering, the compassion of the Buddha to teach others, why the Buddha's teaching was a spiritual breakthrough, and the middle way in the understanding of the great habit of Vapaknam. Firstly, Siddhartha Gautama's witness of suffering was not like regular people. It's important to understand that the vast majority of people live in a world of delusion. Even without touching a drop of alcohol, they tend to be drunk with the apparent perpetuity of life, laboring under the misapprehensions that life will be long and that they will be forever free of illness, and their youth will be eternal. When Prince Siddhartha journeyed outside the palace in his youth, witnessing the 3 so-called angelic emissaries, comprising an old man, a sick man, and a corpse, he did not see these things as others before had seen them. Most people see the signs of receding youth and health and respond with disgust, especially at the sight of the corpse. Siddhartha Gautama's witness of these events was different, however. Confronted by the inevitability of death, Siddhartha Gautama sought an end to suffering. Seeing the 4th of the angelic emissaries, an ascetic, Siddhartha Gautama recognized this path as a way of fighting back against the inevitability of old age, sickness, and death, ultimately inspiring him to renounce the palace in favor of his spiritual quest. Secondly, of note is the special altruism the Buddha exemplified in the teaching of others. Most people, in considering appropriate paths of action in life, have very little more than their own worldly interests at heart. In a family life, an altruistic parent might make sacrifices for the sake of their family, even to the detriment of their own personal interests. Some public figures may forego their own personal interests and those of their family in order to serve the country's interest. Having reached personal enlightenment, Siddhartha Gautama recognized that living beings, including himself, his family, and his subjects, were afflicted by old age, sickness, and death. He considered that others failed even to appreciate the danger of their predicament, let alone to find a way out of it. He realized that if he were not to apply the wisdom arising from enlightenment, there would be no one else to offer an alternative to suffering in his place. Therefore, out of concern not only for his own destiny, not merely for his family, but for all the people of the world ensnared by the cycle of existence, afflicted by old age, sickness, and death, he decided to renounce the world in search of a way to the end of suffering. Knowledge once found, which would lead not only to his own escape from rebirth, but also that of all sentient beings for generations to come. Thirdly comes the issue of why the Buddha's enlightenment can be considered a spiritual breakthrough without precedent. Over the course of countless lifetimes, Siddhartha Gautama had accrued a substantial foundation of meditation. Some of this background is evident by how, during the royal ploughing ceremony at the age of only 7 years, Siddhartha could attain the first absorption without instruction. In previous lifetimes, while still pursuing perfections as a bodhisattva, he had already attained 5 of the 6 mental powers, or abhiññā, in a lifetime as Sumedha, when he received the prophecy of forthcoming Buddhahood. It is recorded that at that time, if the bodhisattva had wished to attain arahanthood, he could have done so immediately, thereby benefiting personally from all the perfections he had accrued for himself. Instead, however, he decided to pursue perfections further until reaching Buddhahood, so that not only could he reach an end of suffering, but he could also teach other worldlings to attain the end of suffering too. Spiritual tradition contemporary to the Buddha was largely the realm of theory. All theories of liberation available before the Buddha's enlightenment dealt entirely with ecstatic meditation or meditation focused outside the body. Then as now, almost all success was attributed to ideas and stratagems. But as a result of countless past lifetimes dedicated to true meditation, Siddhartha Gautama quickly recognized that all the forms of practice available, although advanced, were mere conceptualizing, and could not lead to enlightenment or release from old age, sickness, and death. He realized that theory alone, in the hands of a virtueless person, would be as dangerous as a sword without a scabbard. Theory needs to go hand in hand with the inner attainment of virtue to be a viable path to freedom from suffering. It was for this reason that Siddhartha Gautama renounced the palace life in a quest for more than mere concentration, but full-factored meditation and insight, as borne witness by the Majjhima Nikaya's Mahajatari Sutta, which tells us that the sort of meditation the Buddha discovered at his enlightenment was supported by all the other factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, and could therefore be referred to as right meditation or samma samadhi. His enlightenment could not be attributed, as assumed by some, to mere reflection or theorizing. Those who assume that the Buddha gained enlightenment spontaneously, like Bahya Darujiriya at the roadside, would be mistaken, because even Bahya Darujiriya's enlightenment can be traced back to the efforts made, staking his life of meditation in previous existences. So the breakthrough of the Buddha was to discover internalized focus in meditation, where meditation was combined with the other factors of the Eightfold Path. The fourth and final issue is the middle way in the understanding of the great habit of Vapaknam, which we have mentioned briefly in passing when talking about the 3 cycles and 12 components. In the Buddha's first sermon to the group of 5 initial disciples, he advocated to steer between the extremes of sensual indulgence and self-mortification in one's practice. The Buddha said the practice should aim instead for the middle way, which the Buddha had already practiced to completion. The great habit of Vapaknam provided additional details as an indicator for when we have achieved the middle way of practice. In theoretical terms, we can know that we are on the right track if we are practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, or more briefly, if we are practicing self-discipline, meditation, and wisdom. Then these are also the theoretical essentials of the middle way. In terms of practice, however, the great habit of Vapaknam explained in a sermon he gave on the 3rd of January in 1955 that the word middle in the term middle way is used in a literal but also a profound way, which is elsewhere overlooked. He explained that practice that is in the middle is bringing one's mind to a standstill in the middle of the human body. The exact position of the central point of the body can be pictured by imagining two thin threads, one running horizontally from the navel directly through the back, and the other running horizontally from one side to the other on the same level. The intersection of the two threads is a point no larger than a needle point, and this is called the sixth base of the mind. Two finger breadths vertically above this intersection is the seventh base of the mind, or the precise central point of the body. This seventh base of the mind is where the mind belongs. The great abbot of Wat Pak Nam explained that the ability to bring our mind to a standstill at this center of the body is what we call majjhima, or centering. When the mind comes to a standstill at the center of the body, it breaks free of the two extremes of sensual indulgence and self-mortification. Therefore, it is the trailhead of the pathway towards arahantship. Once we're able to practice this optimally, then this is what we can call the Eightfold Path. When all 8 components of the path are represented at the center of the body, a clear, bright sphere will arise at the center of the body, which is called the sphere of the initial path, or the Patamamakka sphere, or Dhammanupassana Satipatthana sphere. It will be mirror bright and appear the size of the sun or the moon, and situated at the center of the sphere of Dharma. So this is another reason we give great importance to the Dhammacakkapavattana Sutta in the Dhammakaya meditation tradition. So today we've been looking at the Dhammacakkapavattana Sutta. For my next live session online, which will, fingers crossed, be a week on Sunday morning, we'll look at the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Buddha's final teaching. So for good measure, I'd like to remind viewers to keep the questions coming in about meditation or topics you've learned in the lecture to the email address you can see spelled out on the slide, and I will do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to avoid recklessness or complacency, maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Hopefully, as a result of today's session, you will be better able to follow the middle way toward the extinction of suffering in your lives. So that's all for today. Thanks for viewing. So long, folks, and stay safe.